When you think of a prison, you might picture a harsh, overcrowded place. But some go beyond what anyone could imagine. In one prison, keeping clean is a losing battle.
This is what we call our CR. As you can see, it's very open.
With lice, cockroaches, and rats everywhere. Another prison forces inmates to walk barefoot through sewage-filled grounds, stripping them of dignity and basic hygiene.
Sometimes we will go for a pee when the other one is inside. Sometimes there's just no other way.
These shocking conditions are just the beginning of what life is like in Africa's worst women's prisons. Bollé Correctional and Rehabilitation Facility. On the outskirts of Bamako, Mali lies a facility unlike any you would expect. It is not flashy, it is not famous, and it certainly doesn't draw much outside attention. But step inside, and you will find a world unlike any other. This is the Bollé Correctional and Rehabilitation Facility for women and girls, the largest of its kind in the country. Bollé has been operating since 1998, housing between 50 to 70 women and girls at any given time. Most of them are Malian, though the population reflects a broader mix of West Africa, with a few even coming from countries as far away as Nigeria and Zimbabwe. The inmates may come from different places, but they share a harsh reality. Resources are scarce, medical care is nearly non-existent, and life here is far from easy. Unlike prisons in other parts of the world, the women in Bollé don't wait around for meals to be served or supplies to be handed out. They run things themselves. Everything from food to medicine is their responsibility, a fact that has forced them to rely on skills and trades to keep going. Cloth dyeing, sewing, and soap making have become not only a lifeline for the women, but also the backbone of the facility's economy. These trades do more than keep the prison functioning. They give the inmates a chance to learn something useful for when they're released. The prison's self-sufficiency isn't limited to the adults. Children born to inmates can live with their mothers until the age of 4. But even here, the mothers are on their own. There is no budget for clothing, feeding, or medicating these little ones, so the women must figure it all out themselves. It is a system that is as unforgiving as it sounds. While many might assume the women are there for prostitution or drug-related crimes, the reality is far from this. Most of the inmates have been convicted of infanticide. Young women, drawn to urban centers like Bamako in search of work or a husband, often find themselves in dire situations. Some turn to prostitution to survive, and when faced with an unplanned pregnancy and no means to provide for a child, they may take a route many find unthinkable. For those who don't fall into this category, charges range from involuntary homicide to fraud or family abandonment. However, many of these women haven't even stood trial. Mali's legal system, stretched thin and burdened by delays, leaves many inmates waiting for justice in a limbo that can last years. It shows just how the wheels of justice often turn painfully slowly in underfunded systems. Bollé isn't a place that attracts much sympathy, but it is full of stories. One of survival, choices, and consequences. While Bollé is tough, in Sierra Leone, there is another prison that could easily be called one of the worst for women and their kids. Freetown Female Correctional Center. Life behind bars in Sierra Leone is anything but simple, especially for women. It is a world where even the basics, like healthcare, hygiene, and time with your family, become luxuries. But inside one of the country's most notorious facilities, survival depends on adapting to constant challenges. The number of female prisoners in Sierra Leone has doubled in recent years, putting an already strained system under more pressure. With only 2 separate detention facilities for women, space is limited. The largest, known as Freetown Female Correctional Center, holds about 90 female inmates. It also houses those serving life sentences or waiting on death row. The death penalty remains legal in Sierra Leone for crimes like murder, treason, and armed robbery. However, most women in the prison are not there for such severe crimes. Instead, they are locked up for minor offenses like theft, loitering, or even being unable to pay off a debt. These laws are often unclear and hit the poor hardest. Many women end up stuck in prison for months, sometimes years, because they can't afford the fines or meet strict bail requirements. The backlog in the court system only makes things worse. For those inside, the rainy season brings its own set of problems. The heavy rains in Freetown can soak into everything. From May to October, the city becomes one of the wettest capitals on Earth, with downpours transforming roads into rivers and drenching every corner of daily life. The open spaces outside the cells become useless, and the damp air clings to everything, making it difficult to dry clothes or bedding. The rainy season brings more than discomfort. It brings sickness, worsening an already difficult environment. Medical care is scarce, and the facility's single doctor and a handful of nurses are often overwhelmed. Supplies like medicine and sanitary towels are hard to come by. For mothers, the challenges multiply. Many women bring their young children with them to prison. Though there is no official policy, kids under 2 usually stay with their mothers. After that, the child might be sent to live with family or placed in an orphanage. It is a heartbreaking reality that adds to the emotional weight these women carry. Beyond Freetown, things aren't much better. The lack of separate facilities for women in other parts of Sierra Leone adds to the problem, forcing women to endure overcrowded and unsuitable conditions. Elsewhere, a different prison carries its own burdens. Women locked behind bars fight battles that go beyond the physical. Luzira Women's Prison. The entrance to Luzira. Women's prison doesn't prepare you for the stories buried inside. From the outside, it looks like any old, functional building tucked a few kilometers away from the bustling streets of Kampala. The women who live here, dressed in bright yellow uniforms, might greet you with warm smiles. At first glance, the prison seems clean and orderly, a place that feels less intimidating than what you might expect. Yet, as you spend more time there, the surface begins to crack, revealing something much heavier. The women here come from all over Uganda. Many have been convicted of serious crimes, and their sentences often stretch for decades. They make up more than 38% of the country's female prison population, and most know they will spend the rest of their lives locked away. Some have been moved far from their home districts, making it nearly impossible for family and friends to visit them. For many, this isolation adds an invisible weight that is hard to put into words. If you stop to ask, you will find out that their smiles mask deep loneliness. Days, months, and even years pass without a single visit from loved ones. The reasons vary. Some families can't afford the journey, others feel ashamed of the crimes their relatives have been convicted of, and some women simply never had the chance to tell their families where they ended up. It is not uncommon for these women to sit in silence, wondering what became of their children or if anyone still thinks about them. For those lucky enough to get visitors, the visits are few and far between. Often, the cost of traveling to the prison is much more than what little money their families have, especially in a country where many people live below the poverty line. Husbands who initially visit might stop coming altogether, choosing instead to start over with new families. The sense of isolation becomes more vivid when you hear stories like Justine Nankia's. Convicted of a capital offense, she spent 2 years in solitary confinement within Luzira's condemned section. For her, life was a cycle of locked doors and emptiness. Every day she was fed just one meal at midday. Her small cell had no mattress, and she was left alone for hours on end. The silence was suffocating, broken only when wardens opened the heavy doors so she could take her bucket outside. At the time, she was the only prisoner in that section. 4 reinforced doors separated her from the rest of the prison. She didn't expect freedom. Being sentenced to death felt final. But 20 years later, she was unexpectedly released. That kind of isolation changes a person in ways most of us will never understand. The women at Luzira, whether they are in solitary confinement or not, carry these emotional burdens every day. For some, the daily routines and the community they have formed within the prison walls provide some relief. But for many, the loneliness never fades. But for all the difficulties here, there is another women's prison in a far-off corner of the world. Built to hold far fewer inmates than it now crams inside, it is a place infamous for its inhumane conditions. Antanimora Prison. It is hard to imagine a place where every corner tells a tale of overcrowding, hunger, and desperation. Yet that is the reality for thousands of inmates at Antanimora Prison, located in the heart of Madagascar's capital. Here, life unfolds in ways few can comprehend. Built over a century ago, this prison was designed to house 800 people, but today it holds more than 5 times that number. With over 4,000 inmates crammed into its crumbling cells, many are still waiting for their day in court. For those inside, time feels endless, stretching on as they await judgment or simply try to endure another day. The conditions are as harsh as they sound. Cleanliness is nearly impossible to maintain. Lice, cockroaches, fleas, and rats are more than nuisances. They are constant companions. International organizations have stepped in, trying to combat the infestation. During disinfestation operations, inmates are required to take everything from their cells outside: their clothes, bedding, and other belongings. All these items, along with the bare walls of the prison, are sprayed with insecticide. After hours of waiting, the prisoners are allowed to return. Once inside, each prisoner is given a bar of soap and a thin mat. Food is scarce, and meals consist of little more than boiled cassava, a starchy food that offers barely enough energy to get through the day. Malnutrition is rampant, with chronic hunger leading to illness and death. Studies show that nearly 2/3 of the prisoners are affected by severe malnutrition. For the women, especially pregnant ones and those raising children behind bars, the situation is even worse. Their bodies grow weaker from the lack of proper food, and without outside support, many struggle to survive. Medical care is almost non-existent. With only one physician for thousands of inmates, access to treatment is rare. Most illnesses go untreated, leaving prisoners to fend for themselves in conditions that weaken their health even further. Those who violate the rules face even harsher treatment. Solitary confinement is used as punishment for offenses like smuggling drugs or possessing a cell phone. Meals in solitary are cut in half, leaving the offenders even hungrier. Corruption adds to the weight of the injustice inside these walls. Stories circulate of judges demanding bribes in exchange for acquittals or shorter sentences. For families desperate to free their loved ones, these demands are often impossible to meet. Even within the prison, some inmates, appointed as auxiliary guards due to staff shortages, are known to accept bribes. They act as middlemen, transporting food or money to prisoners for a price. Yet even this informal system fails to address the deeper problems of the prison. Life in Antanimora prison is divided by blocks, but the divisions do little to bring order. Guards are under-equipped, armed only with old weapons and nightsticks. Record-keeping is still done by hand, adding to the chaos and disorganization. Inmates spend their days in overcrowded spaces, trying to avoid conflict or disease. The weight of survival rests heavily on everyone here. Now it is time for today's subscriber's pick. The image we are looking at today is enough to cause one to do a double take. A row of women, dressed in bright orange jumpsuits, are hanging from wooden frames in what looks like a prison yard. This disturbing visual brings up an immediate question. What is the story behind this? Could it be a recreation, an artistic protest, or something darker? When we think of the worst women's prison in Africa, we usually picture overcrowded cells, unsafe conditions, or mistreatment. But this image paints an even darker picture. While no official reports confirm women being hanged like this in African prisons today, some regions are known for harsh punishments and inhumane conditions. For example, in certain countries, women face public executions or extreme punishments, especially when accused of serious crimes. Looking closer, the setting adds to the mystery. The wooden frames, the worn-down buildings, and the heavy atmosphere make it feel like this could be a real place. So let's talk. What do you think this image represents? Art, protest, or a brutal reality? And if it were a real prison, how would you imagine life there? Well, this is just one side of what life can look like in such places. There are others where the conditions and stories are even harder to imagine. Al-Qanater Women's Prison. Imagine waking up in a place where freedom is nothing but a distant memory, where your daily routine is dictated by the whims of others. For many women in prisons around the world, this is their harsh reality. The story of one such prison, a place in Egypt where women fight not only for justice, but for basic human dignity, is an eye-opener. Al-Qanater Women's Prison, located in Egypt, is one of the most notorious in the country. It is known for the poor conditions women face there, and it has caught the attention of human rights organizations and prisoners alike. The stories that come from inside paint a picture of what seems like an impossible life. Yet the challenges faced in this prison are very real. Many women find themselves locked away in a place that is supposed to be a form of justice, but instead it becomes a constant cycle of suffering. One of the biggest problems is overcrowding. The prison was designed to hold far fewer people than it does now. But because of the increasing number of prisoners, especially women, the cells are packed. It is not uncommon to find 2 or even 3 women crammed into a single bed. And for the ones who don't have beds, they sleep on the cold, hard floor. In some areas, there are no beds at all, so the women have no choice but to sleep wherever they can, often in the bathroom or cramped spaces meant for much fewer people. The overcrowding is bad enough, but there is more to it. The cells themselves offer little space to move around. For most, a bed is a luxury they can only dream of. Women who are able to afford it, those with families who can send money, get to sleep on a single bed. But for those who are not so lucky, the floor is their only option. The prison is divided into 12 wards, but the overcrowding means there is no separation between prisoners based on their crimes. It is common for political prisoners, activists, and even journalists to find themselves locked in the same cell as those convicted of serious crimes like murder. Newcomers to the prison are usually assigned a nabatishia. These women are also prisoners, often serving life sentences for serious crimes. Their job is to oversee and control the others. This means they have power over everything: when the women eat, when they go to the bathroom, and how they must behave. They are not just helpers, but enforcers, expected to carry out their duties with absolute authority. The prison administration chooses them, knowing they have the strength to keep order. This system leaves the prisoners under the control of someone who is just as trapped as they are. Yet they wield power that affects everyone around them. Another major issue in Al-Qanater is the lack of clean water and proper sanitation. It's common for prisoners to go without clean drinking water or proper facilities for bathing. The bathrooms are filthy, and this only adds to the spread of disease among the women. The medical care is even worse. If a woman falls ill, she might not receive treatment at all. The medical facilities in the prison are basic at best, and many women suffer because their health issues go unaddressed. The situation is grim, with little hope of improvement. Food, or the lack of it, is another serious concern. Meals are small, often lacking in nutrition. Many prisoners depend on their families to bring food, or they rely on the money they can send to buy better meals from the prison store. But not all women are fortunate enough to have families who can help them. Some go hungry or are forced to eat whatever the prison offers, which is far from adequate. Bribery is common, and women often have to give part of what they have received to the guards, the searchers, and even the nabatishia. The nabatishia often takes whatever she wants. The emotional toll on the women is just as severe as the physical. Many face mistreatment at the hands of the guards. Prisoners who refuse to obey the nabatishia's orders or make a mistake are often subjected to cruel punishment. This punishment comes in stages, beginning with the nabatishia herself. She will beat the prisoner and send her to the chief of investigations, where the torture continues. Afterwards, the prisoner is handed over to the disciplinary officer, known as Abla Sayeda, who will strip her of her clothes and continue the beating. This process is known as the threefold torture. It is a brutal and terrifying experience for any prisoner, and many face it regularly. On top of all this, there are allegations of corruption within the prison system. Some prisoners are given better treatment if they can afford to bribe their way to it. This creates an unfair system where those with money or connections get privileges that others do not. For many, the prison is a place of constant suffering, and any hope of fair treatment seems out of reach. Despite these conditions, human rights groups continue to push for reforms. They demand better treatment for all prisoners, improved living conditions, access to healthcare, and an end to the corruption and brutality that many women face in places like Al-Qanater. Some changes have been made, but the fight is far from over. The prison system in Egypt and in many other countries still has a long way to go before it can truly be considered humane. But this is just one place. In another part of the world, there is a facility with an even darker reputation. Women who have been held there describe it as worse than hell itself. Chikurubi Maximum Prison. Life inside certain prisons can be unimaginable, especially for women who are left to endure harsh conditions every day. In Zimbabwe, activists have described the situation in Chikurubi Maximum Prison as worse than hell. For the women imprisoned there, survival is a daily struggle, with little hope of comfort or dignity. Many inmates walk barefoot, even though the prison grounds are covered in overflowing sewage. Basic needs like food and clean water are always in short supply. Prisoners rely heavily on family members to bring them supplies. But even that is not guaranteed. Prison officers, often frustrated by delays in their salaries, are known to steal food and other items meant for the prisoners. What the prison provides as food is barely enough to live on. Breakfast is plain porridge with no sugar. Lunch consists of sadza, a thick maize porridge served with boiled vegetables like spinach in salty water. There is no cooking oil, no meat, and no variety. For many, hunger is constant, and the quality of the food does little to keep them healthy. One well-known prisoner, Linda Masarira, a prominent activist in Zimbabwe, shared her experiences after spending time at Chikurubi. She once joined other inmates in a hunger strike to protest the prison's terrible conditions. Instead of addressing their concerns, the authorities responded with violence. Masarira was beaten and then thrown into solitary confinement. The cell where she was kept was only 3 square meters. Inside, there was a toilet that barely worked, and a concrete slab served as her bed. She was left to endure this isolation while battling with the physical and mental toll of such an environment. Overcrowding is another serious problem in the prison. Cells are packed so tightly that inmates have to arrange themselves in a single direction to sleep. They even wake each other up and coordinate turns when shifting positions, as there is no space to move freely. This lack of room makes life inside even more unbearable. Female inmates also face the added challenge of having no access to sanitary products. Though some organizations have donated toiletries and hygiene supplies, the prisoners say they never see these items. Only women who are frequently visited by their families have access to such necessities. These women often hire others to do small tasks for them in exchange for sanitary products. For those who don't have pads or any support, the only option is to use dirty rags, which further threatens their health. Women in this situation have little choice but to endure the discomfort and shame that comes with such poor hygiene. The situation is equally terrible for children. Some women give birth in the prison, while others bring their young children with them when they are convicted. These children grow up in the same terrible conditions, facing the same shortages of food, water, and hygiene. Their lives, from the very beginning, are shaped by an environment that offers no kindness. For the women in Chikurubi Maximum, every day is a fight for survival. The lack of basic human rights and dignity inside those walls shows just how bad the situation is. Prison is meant to serve as a place for justice, but for these women, it is a never-ending punishment that strips them of their humanity. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.